Shocking new revelations were recently exposed about Dr. Anthony Fauci. You're going to want to watch this video all the way through because the mainstream media is not telling you about any of this. We're going to answer the question, should Dr. Fauci go to prison? Let me start with a disclaimer. YouTube has a very strict policy on any videos dealing with the pandemic. You cannot question government guidance on medical treatments. You cannot question the effectiveness of vaccines. And you cannot contradict the government's claims about COVID-19. So we're not going to address any of those issues in this video. I am focusing specifically on the new evidence of potential government corruption by Dr. Fauci. The first thing you need to know is these two men, Dr. David Morenz, who is the senior advisor to Dr. Fauci, and Dr. Peter Daszak, who is the president of EcoHealth Alliance. In case you're not aware of the controversy around EcoHealth Alliance, the National Institutes of Health, or NIH, led by Dr. Fauci, gave more than $4 million in grant funds to EcoHealth Alliance for a study called Understanding the Risk of Bat Coronavirus Emergence. A report from the Government Accountability Office found that more than $500,000 of that money went to the Wuhan Institute of Virology between 2014 and 2021. This money was used to conduct genetic experiments to combine naturally occurring bat coronaviruses with SARS and MERS viruses, resulting in hybridized, also known as chimeric, coronavirus strains. To put this in context, since 2008, EcoHealth Alliance has been awarded $90.3 million in federal funding. What's shocking to most people is that we're just hearing about this now, 4 years after the pandemic started in March of 2020. Wouldn't this story have been important for all of us to know about during the pandemic? This type of research is commonly referred to as gain-of-function research and is considered risky because it could result in a lab leak. The evidence now shows that the reason we didn't hear about the study was because there was a cover-up by Dr. Fauci, Dr. Morenz, and Dr. Daszak. Here's an email between Dr. Morenz and Dr. Daszak where they talk about trying to avoid FOIAs. These are Freedom of Information Act requests where it is the law that the public can request to see the documents for any public official. Dr. Morenz says, I forgot to say there is no worry about FOIAs. I can either send stuff to Tony in his private Gmail or hand it to him at work or at his house. They are talking about communicating with private Gmail accounts so people cannot see what they're talking about. Here's Dr. Morenz testifying in front of Congress where he describes his friendship with Dr. Daszak.
In early 2020, Peter Daszak, who's been a personal friend of mine for almost 20 years, I've had government interactions with him that would be on my NIH email, but almost all my interactions with him for years have been personal. As a friend.
So they have been close personal friends for 20 years. Here's another email between Dr. Morenz and Dr. Daszak where they say, from Tony's numerous recent comments to me, and from what Francis has been vocal about over the past 5 days, they are trying to protect you, which also protects their own reputations. Here is Dr. Morenz being questioned during a congressional hearing where they're asking about another email where they talk about kickbacks.
On August 27, 2020, after NIH was awarded a $7.5 million grant to EcoHealth Alliance, you wrote to him and you asked, do I get a kickback? Too much fooking, F-O-O-K-I-N-G, money. Do you deserve it all? Question mark. Let's discuss. Would you like to explain?
That's typical black humor between people like Peter and me and other folks who show up in these emails.
And he responded saying, thanks for the kind words, and of course there's a kickback, period. You think that's appropriate behavior between NIH, somebody who works for NIAID, to a grantee who just received $7.5 million from the government?
So his explanation is that his comments in the emails were all just a big joke. We have Dr. Morenz and Dr. Daszak as close personal friends, and they're all communicating with Dr. Fauci. A lot of money is going to Dr. Daszak's company for gain-of-function research. They are talking about kickbacks to NIH. They're talking about covering up their messages from FOIA so that nobody finds out. And all of this is going on during the pandemic. Here is another email from Dr. Morenz. I learned from our FOIA lady here how to make emails disappear after I am FOIA'd, but before the search starts. So I think we are all safe. Plus, I deleted most of those earlier emails after sending them to Gmail. Here he is admitting to destroying evidence to avoid FOIA requests. Here's another email showing a tactic they used. This is from Greg Folkers, who is the chief of staff to Dr. Fauci. This is an email he was sending about virologist Dr. Christian Anderson. But instead of spelling out the name Anderson, he spelled it Anders $N. That way, if they received a FOIA request, they could say, I don't have any emails about Anderson to show you. I only have emails about Anders $N. Sorry, no documents exist. Why would they be trying to cover up emails about Dr. Anderson? Here's an email from Dr. Anderson to Dr. Fauci and others at NIH at the very start of the pandemic. It says, our main work over the last couple of weeks has been focused on trying to disprove any type of lab theory. But we are at a crossroad where the scientific evidence isn't conclusive enough to say that we have high confidence in any of the three main theories considered. In this email, Dr. Anderson admits that there is no evidence to suggest COVID did not come from a lab, but they're pushing that narrative anyway. Is this why the staff at NIH were trying to hide the emails about Dr. Anderson from the public? To make matters worse, it looks like Dr. Daszak was lying in his grant proposals to get government money. That is procurement fraud. An electronic draft proposal was uncovered where Dr. Daszak wrote in a comment to take out the mention of working with the Chinese lab at Wuhan. He writes, if we win this contract, I do not propose that all of this work will necessarily be conducted by Ralph, but I do want to stress the U.S. side of this proposal so that DARPA are comfortable with our team. Once we get the funds, we can then allocate who does what exact work. And I believe that a lot of these assays can be done in Wuhan as well. He's admitting to trying to mislead DARPA to get the funding, and then they're going to send it to China. In a second comment, another contributor to the report discusses that the Chinese labs are not at a high enough safety standard. He writes, in the US, these recombinant SARS-CoV are studied under BSL-3, not BSL-2, especially important for those that are able to bind and replicate in primary human cells. In China, might be growing these virus under BSL-2. US researchers will likely freak out. Here's his explanation from the hearing.
This is simply a draft proposal where one group's suggesting one thing, another is suggesting another. The final proposal is what matters. And I want to remind the committee that this proposal was not funded. The work was never done. It is utterly irrelevant to the origins of COVID.
Well, it's not irrelevant, Dr. Daszak. It's very relevant.
He says his comments do not matter because this was just a draft. I disagree. Just from what I've shown you so far, this is pretty shocking evidence of fraud and corruption. So what about Dr. Fauci? The problem with Dr. Fauci is that from the beginning, he was denying that any of this was taking place. It's clear from the emails that they were communicating with Dr. Fauci. And then he would go and say something different under oath in a congressional testimony. Just as a reminder, I'm going to show you some highlights of what Dr. Fauci said under oath. Keep in mind all the emails I just showed you and ask yourself, is Dr. Fauci lying?
I will repeat again, the NIH and NIAID categorically has not funded gain-of-function research to be conducted in the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
You do support it in the U.S. We have 11 labs doing it, and you have allowed it here. We have a committee to do it, but the committee has granted every exemption. You're You're fooling with Mother Nature here. You're allowing superviruses to be created with a 15% mortality. It's very dangerous. I think it was a huge mistake to share this with China.
And you are implying that what we did was responsible for the deaths of individual. I totally resent that. And if anybody is lying here, Senator, it is you.
Will you today finally take some responsibility for funding gain-of-function research in Wuhan?
Senator, with all due respect, I disagree with so many of the things that you've said. First of all, gain of function is a very nebulous term. You have said that I am unwilling to take any responsibility for the current pandemic. I have no responsibility for the current pandemic. The current pandemic, okay?
In my opinion, Dr. Fauci was lying about everything. He lied about gain of function, and he hid what he knew about EcoHealth Alliance. If Dr. Fauci had just told the truth from the beginning, the pandemic would have gone so much differently. If we had started the pandemic by investigating what was in that lab, we could have looked to see if they had the original virus. If we had the original genetic sequence, we could have developed a normal vaccine instead of what we got. Instead, Dr. Fauci pretended he didn't know what was going on when he knew exactly what was going on in that lab. When people started criticizing Dr. Fauci, let me play for you what he said.
Anybody who's looking at this carefully realizes that there's a distinct anti-science flavor to this. So if they get up and criticize science, nobody's going to know what they're talking about. But if they get up and really aim their bullets at Tony Fauci, well, people could recognize there's a person there, there's a face, there's a voice you can recognize, you see him on television. So it's easy to criticize, but they're really criticizing science because I represent science. That's dangerous.
He said, "I am science." Excuse me? That's not how I understand science is supposed to work. Isn't science where different people question each other's work? What Dr. Fauci is saying is that he alone should decide what science is, while he's secretly taking kickbacks on the side while hiding the truth in his personal Gmail account. It is unacceptable that he is hiding the truth from the American people and then going on TV and claiming that he is science. And then there is this video. This is Dr. Fauci testifying at a deposition in 2022 where he's being questioned about why NIH staff was working with Facebook. They were taking down the accounts of anyone who questioned Dr. Fauci. In this video, you will see Dr. Fauci pick his nose and eat his boogers.
Here's an email chain from April of 2020. Can you turn to the second to last?
Did you see that? I'm going to zoom in, and I want you to ask yourself, is there nostril penetration? I think that there is. He goes in to pick his nose, and then he moves his hand down, and he does a weird sucking thing with his mouth. It looks to me like Dr. Fauci is eating his boogers. Now you might ask, why is this important? It's important because this is the head of the National Institutes of Health. He's supposed to be telling us what is sanitary, and I have video evidence of him eating his own boogers. Is it sanitary to eat your own boogers? Why are we listening to this guy? Given all this evidence, I think that Dr. Fauci can be accused of 3 main crimes. The first is perjury. Did Dr. Fauci lie to Congress? I think if you contrast the emails with his video testimony, the evidence shows that he did lie to Congress. That is punishable by fines and prison time for up to 5 years. The next crime is criminal malpractice. Doctors have what is called a duty of care. That essentially means that doctors are expected to heal their patients, not hurt them. In this case, we are all Dr. Fauci's patients, and we were all affected. Malpractice becomes criminal if the person acts intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly. I think the emails show that Dr. Fauci lied intentionally, which is the worst category. He knew what was going on, and his actions put the health of others at risk. This would be a violation of his duty of care as a doctor, and it would mean that his actions are a crime. I want to use a comparison. Do you remember when Michael Jackson died? He died of a drug overdose given to him by his doctor. Now, there's lots of conspiracies out there that Michael Jackson was murdered. But whether he was intentionally murdered or whether it was just an accident, the fact remains that Michael Jackson's doctor was sentenced to prison in Los Angeles County Jail for 4 years for involuntary manslaughter. The CDC reports that over 1 million people died from COVID. How is it that Michael Jackson's doctor went to prison and nothing has happened to Dr. Fauci? Given what we know, that doesn't seem right. Which brings me to the third potential crime. Dr. Fauci could be arrested for murder. If a doctor intentionally lies to a patient and that patient dies, that would normally be prosecuted as murder. Let me just remind you of what happened. This is video footage from a funeral during COVID. Everyone is sitting 6 feet apart because of the mandates from Dr. Fauci. The sons move in to comfort their mother, who is mourning the death of her husband. The funeral director comes in and pulls them apart. This is what Dr. Fauci did to us. And we had no idea that he was lying. In my opinion, there absolutely needs to be a criminal investigation into Dr. Fauci. And he can have the right to a fair trial, just like any other American. But the only thing you need to arrest someone and start the process is probable cause. And it seems to me that there is plenty of evidence to establish probable cause. And I know a lot of people think that they'll just wait until a Republican becomes president before starting the investigation. But we don't have to wait. If Dr. Fauci committed any crimes in any state, that state attorney general can issue a warrant for his arrest. We don't have to wait. He can be held accountable right now. Many of you saw this week that Donald Trump was convicted of a felony in New York. Legal experts from both parties agree that this was a deeply flawed and unfair trial. Trump was prosecuted by Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg. He's not even a state official. He's the district attorney for this one little district in New York. And Alvin Bragg single-handedly brought a case against President Trump. I think you will agree that the evidence I have shown you so far against Dr. Fauci is more evidence than they had against Donald Trump. Every district attorney across the nation should be filing arrest warrants for Dr. Fauci. The American people deserve some accountability for what happened. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think that Dr. Fauci should go to prison? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you like this video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future videos. Yesterday, I did a live stream on Donald Trump's guilty verdict with another YouTuber, Just Jen Reacts. If you want to check that out, I have included the link in the description down below. Also, we did a second uncensored podcast about topics we cannot talk about on YouTube. That's available to members only on the website wolvesandfinance.com. I want to say a big thank you to everyone who has signed up for a monthly membership for $6 a month. More and more of my videos keep getting demonetized, so your support is how I'm able to keep sharing the truth. I'm Zach from Wolves and Finance. Thank you for watching.